Today we're going to talk about improving the composition of your photograph. Because too often when we take pictures and we get them in the studio and look at them, there are things that need to be changed. It might be a good photograph in the sense of it would make a good painting, but there's always things that we have to mess with to improve the composition. One of the problems is you can have a good composition like this one. This is a picture in grease, has good, strong, angled lines in there that lead the eye to kind of the archway there. It's pulling the viewer into the painting real strong. And it has nice varied shapes. Shape of the sky, shape of the buildings on the right, buildings on the left, and the sidewalk. It's all varied shape. Problem is, there's just not much contrast. Not that I mind the cloudy day. I don't mind the cloudy day, but there are no darks. The sky is light, the buildings are light, the sidewalk is fairly light. The only darks are the flowers and the flower pots. And that's not bad. I could still go with the cloudy day and make this darker in the sky, maybe make the sidewalk a little bit darker, maybe the windows a hair darker, and that would give me some more contrast. But what I would like to do here, and I think this one works well in being able to make it a sunlit day. I typically don't like to do that, take a cloudy day photograph and make it sunlit, or a sunlit photograph and make a cloudy day. Go with the light that's there, but there's just no contrast here. So I found it fairly easy to increase the contrast by making it a sunlit day. First thing would be the sky. Of course, it's grease, so the sky would be, if it was clear, it'd be a real dark blue. And that gives you instant contrast. I also got a little darker right here and here to show how the sunlight would hit the side view of that balcony. The next would be hitting this more sunlit, this front of the building. I'm having the sun come this way. So this side of the building is going to be very, and it's just white and orange or white and yellow ochre. Could use white and cad yellow, but again, that's the most intense color. But warming that up, changing the value to getting a lot lighter because now it's hit by the sunlight. Also a little strip of sunlight on this wall right here. Then I want to move to the shadowed wall on the left. So I'm putting this wall in shadow right here. And then the shadow on the sidewalk has to be darker because you can see the sidewalk is a lot darker than the wall. So you put it in shadow, both of them, and the sidewalk still has to be darker. So you have to continue the value relationship as you move everything into the shadow. Then I get some of these other darks in here on these buildings. Everything's going to be sunlit as far as the buildings go, except for the right side here that's being hit by the sunlight. So again, just putting more of those, the buildings here, the sides of the buildings, the front of the buildings, it's all in shadow because nothing is being hit by the sunlight there. Continuing on, putting this in shadow. And these buildings, or sides of the buildings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they're all in shadow, but they have to be different values because they're facing different directions. These two can be somewhat the same value. This is facing different from that. And I'm making this a little lighter because the sunlight will hit this building and bounce back into the shadow. Same thing here. It bounces back. So I want to show that reflected light by scrubbing in a little bit of orange. I could get maybe 2, 3 values of just a muted blue-violet and get different values in here. All I'm thinking of is a darker value and making the color cool. And in case of the Photoshop here, I can go thin enough, kind of like scrubbing the paint on instead of laying it in thick. Thin enough that some of the color underneath shows through and some of the value, even though I'm getting it darker. And then lastly here, I'm getting the kind of the details. All the flowers, I'm just doing a simple sunlit green, more of a yellow green, real strong here. A little more of an olive green, real not quite as strong over there. So I'm varying the sunlit greens a little bit, and just a dark blue green. So Viridian and cad yellow and white, maybe a little bit of red for the sunlight. And then Viridian and ultramarine blue. A little bit of ochre, but not much. And of course some white to get the right value for the shadow of the flowers. And getting a little more contrast on the woodwork on the windows here. It's sunlit, so I can't leave it like this. This is cloudy daylight hitting those. So instead of kind of a reddish violet, it's going to be kind of a reddish orange. And I pushed it pretty strong. And then some of the detail, again, the flowers here, the bench, getting some darker accents right underneath the arch. And I did not get this in here. I'd have to blast that really sunlit also. But you can see the difference here. And this is, a lot of work. It helps to have Photoshop to do that, but it is doable. But I can also do it just the thumbnail, just finding the big shapes and then getting this shadow pattern, the shadow pattern that starts on the left side and goes down to the sidewalk and some of the dark pattern that's on the building. Easier to do it with a thumbnail drawing. But this gives me here a change of pace from this, which again has no contrast at all, to push in it more sunlight, with the sunlight and shadow. Now the next one here is also in Greece, and again a cloudy day. I'm not going to change it to a sunlit day because there's a lot of contrast here, even though it is cloudy. You got the strong dark pattern of these green trees all in there. You got the two values of the light blue mountains that are dark compared to the white houses. Then you got the light of the white buildings. And when I look at these, I don't want to draw 10 or 12 buildings here. This is going to be one shape for the most part. These will be one shape, maybe with a dark and light in it, and a dark and light shape there. So simplify those buildings, because what interests me is the contrast between the trees and the buildings. But then I need something in the foreground to lead me to the buildings. And right now this doesn't. This gets way too busy here and too cluttered looking here in front. But there's a lot going on there that I can pull from. I do like this wall. There's a wall right here, kind of leads me to the building. So if I take that wall, and at one point, maybe 100 years ago, this wall kind of extended this way. I'm guessing it looks like. And then connected to this kind of gateway, and then the wall picked up here and winds into those trees. So I want to get rid of the clutter here and pull some of it together. And on the computer, I just picked 2 or 3 values of this white, not all one value of white, and just created the wall. And again, you can do this with a thumbnail drawing too. Now I meant to do this in layers, one step at a time, but I got carried away and I forgot to. But I found, I picked one value of green. I think it might have been this green, maybe that green there, and just filled in that flat plane up there and the flat plane down here. Then kind of reconstructed the wall, making it as simple as possible. The goal is to make it more simple, not more complicated. But probably use this value and just got this shape of the white wall, and then did 2 or 3 or 4 different values, a couple of different colors, just to show the different colored rocks on the wall. But simplifying the clutter in the foreground, clutter on top behind the wall, really makes it a lot easier to see this first, mainly because my eye picks up here and then follows the wall and leads to the trees. And that's what I want, is something simple to pull my eye in there. And then I don't need all this stuff on the left. So getting rid of that, and that would be my composition there. Don't need to show much of the wall, just enough of a light shape against the 2 darker shapes of the fields, one on top, one on bottom, and the lighter shape of the wall pulls my eye into the trees and buildings. And also adding water to this, it's really not a dry creek bed. This is the sea over here, the Mediterranean Sea. So it wasn't a creek bed, I don't know what it was, but just making it water gives me a little bit of contrast over here and some interest. But still, the eye is picked up by the strong light wall and leads you into the trees in the building. Now this is from an old photograph during the print days, and this is New Mexico, that high road from Taos to Tracas, New Mexico. It's a very interesting road. Need to go back there now that I have a digital camera. But what I like here is the layers of hills, these counterbalancing hills and trees, you know, different shapes, different sizes, and then the variety of vertical trees that break those up. It's real nice composition. The problem is the road just leads you right out of the picture. So what I want to do is turn this road back. And I can't just literally turn it there. I mean, I could, but I want to pick up a little bit of the road inside these trees and then pick it up over here and then have it go into here and lead on out, which means I have to get rid of some of these trees here. And the more I can kind of get rid of some of the clutter and pull that road in, so it pulls the viewer's eye into the composition back in here, kind of in the center, the better. So turning this road, just taking the same value, pulling it in, a few dots of looking through these trees. It gives those trees more shape. Plus, it gives the feeling that the road is behind those trees. And then creating this field back in here, I just picked up some of this color. Green with a little orange, make it a bit more muted, and clearing out those trees. So I'm creating definite shapes of trees here and leaving a lot of field back in there. And that gives me strong contrast of the darker vertical trees and lighter flat field back in there. Then just simplifying some other areas like the right side here, this hill. Just too busy. Too many little darks and lights with the trees and the flat fields and some buildings. Just pull it together. I want to make sure that these greens up here on this hill are going to be a little lighter and cooler than the greens here. And then lastly, in the foreground, I'll cut down on some of this detail. It's just too busy. I can't, I get stuck, all that detail there. So if I can get rid of some of that and again, have the viewer's eye get pulled through by this road. That field, you can see just creating that shape of the field and just leaving the trees. I created a dark and a light on the trees. But keep your thought process simple. I'm not thinking more complicated here. I'm thinking simplifying. And if I can really visualize the planes, the flat plane here, the vertical plane of the trees, create kind of a line with the road that pulls you into the composition and simplifying some of the background. So it's a little easier to look at and not get caught up in all the clutter. And this one also is in Greece. When I was standing there, the sun was going quickly, so I didn't take much time to kind of zoom in. I knew I could mess with it with a thumbnail sketch in the studio or the computer. But this is kind of obviously the focal point here. So I want to get rid of a lot of the other stuff in there. I want to get rid of a lot of the stuff on both sides and a lot of the ocean. I want to get rid of the boats on the right, on the left, get rid of some of that sea. But now I've cropped it in more. What I really like, again, is these boats. They're kind of pointing towards the wall. The wall leads you up to these figures and the house. There's a lot on the trees here. I could get rid of some of the trees as well. But I think this still works. What I do want to get rid of, and I think this makes more of a square or vertical composition because, again, the wall kind of goes uphill to the house and then the height of the trees. There isn't anything horizontally that interests me. The boats on the right side, left side didn't interest me, and too much of the beach kind of stringing along on the right side. So that leaves me with more of the middle, and I want to go higher. So that tells me more vertical or more square rather than horizontal composition. So changes I want to make here is get rid of some of this stuff. Simplify it so that the viewer can kind of pick up this wall and go up that way. So I got rid of all the clutter. Boats pop out a bit more. I can increase the darks down here if I want a bit more contrast. I can make these shadows bigger if I want, a little more intense. And that creates more contrast. Gives me a little bit darker darks in the foreground and keep the darks slightly lighter in the background so that there's a bit more depth in the photograph. Because again, the photographs can go pretty flat. The darks back in here are almost as dark as down in here. So I want to make sure I'm pushing that difference. I don't want to get these darks too light in the trees. I just want it to look like these are darker. You get that sense of those coming forward because they're darker. You can see just simple things like getting rid of that clutter. It just makes it easier to look at. I could even kind of simplify some of this area too. Get rid of this blue thing, maybe the bush here. Just helps to get rid of stuff that's just not necessary. Now the last one here, this is in String Lake in the Tetons. And I like the lighting. The lighting is set up that, this is in shadow. All that's in shadow, and then the sunlight's hitting the background. And I want to set that up. I'm way too busy here, and a little too busy in here too. I want more of the sunlight showing and less of this shadow. It's getting close to half and half. So what I'm doing here is cropping it. So now there's a lot less of the big dark trees in front. And I'm zooming in, and the sunlit trees and the shadow pattern there in the background are bigger and more important. Here, they weren't. All this dark here on the right side is a bit more important. All this clutter in here. So the first thing I want to do here is cool down the background. Take a look at it. This is way too yellow in the photograph. There is a cooling down from these trees in the middle ground and the background hill. It's definitely cooler. But when I can push that more, I'm going to get more of the effect of sunlight. All I did was glaze a little bit of a bluish, muted blue over it. But I would mix more blue in these greens. I still want it to look somewhat sunlit compared to the shadow, but a lot cooler compared to the sunlit stuff that's in the foreground or middle ground there. And then lastly, getting rid of a lot of this clutter here, sorting out these logs. What I'm looking for is, again, angles. If I can create angles on these logs. So I got an angle going this way. These are kind of straight, but a little bit angled. Angles here, might even have one going this way, so that, again, the viewer's eye can kind of follow these logs back into the background. And working with a shadow pattern in the middle ground and the foreground, I made that shadow pattern here in the foreground darker because it needs to really come forward. Still have two values in there, a lighter shadow, stronger green, and then a real dark bluish green. And the same thing with the middle ground trees back in here. Just pulling that shadow pattern together makes a big deal. I pulled it together here a little bit more and just pulled it together here. Create a bit more of a definite pattern rather than just trying to go with the dots and dashes of dark that you see in the photograph. Really kind of pull it together a bit more. You can simplify and improve the composition by strengthening the shadow pattern, eliminating a lot of detail, creating a bit more contrast. So sometimes you don't have to move anything, you just create more contrast. And again, when you strengthen that shadow pattern, it's always going to make your composition a lot stronger. And I didn't move anything here. I eliminated a lot, but I didn't move anything. But nothing wrong with taking this tree. I like where it is, but I could move it a bit more here. It's a bit too centered, so maybe off-centered this way. But careful not to make it too complicated. The idea is to make the composition more simple. You're, again, changing temperature, working with shadow pattern, eliminating clutter. And I can eliminate clutter, like in this one, by simplifying. In other words, I'm not making it more complicated by eliminating the clutter. I'm just getting rid of all that kind of junk in there. Picking one or two colors and values. Well, there's a lot of color in there, but values are fairly simple. 2 or 3 values of greens and then 2 or 3 values of the lighter wall, just to pull that together. The goal isn't to come up with a great painting. It's to kind of understand the process. And if the painting turns out, that's just kind of extra. But think about the idea of when you look at a reference, what things can you do to make it better?